And now it is time to welcome in, for the first time in the year of our Lord 2019, our regular contributor and constitutional lawyer in LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cozensa. Happy New Year, Scott.
Happy New Year to you, Tim.
All right, so last week we took a look back at the most significant, overlooked, underreported stories affecting individual liberty from 2018. This week, we look ahead to 2019, and you've selected three areas where you think threats or perhaps promising developments for liberty are most likely to occur. So let's start with number one.
Okay, in no particular order, I would say. Number one is gun control. There are so many current active cases in the federal courts, Tim, with I don't know, I think it's not fair to say a likelihood of getting to the Supreme Court, but a very strong chance of getting to the Supreme Court. And among these are the New Jersey magazine ban case and the bump stock ban case. There are others as well, which present the question that the Supreme Court hasn't answered, I think, explicitly enough. There are some legal commentators who believe they have, but that the Heller case needs a bright line rule, which is to say the Supreme Court needs to say to the lower courts, when you're examining a Second Amendment or gun control proposal, this is the lens or filter through which it has to pass in order to meet constitutional muster. They haven't said that explicitly enough, at least for some in the federal judiciary, and so we have this hodgepodge where some regulations are passed through at a lower level of scrutiny, and some are passed through at a higher level of scrutiny. It's an untenable solution, I think, going forward, and I expect to see, or hope to see, I would suggest, some normalization or clarification, I would suggest, from the court. Yeah.
Now, in the past, when someone like Barack Obama gets elected, or the Democrats take control of one or both houses of Congress, chambers of Congress, that has resulted in a greater energy in the gun rights movement than when you have perhaps someone like Trump or Bush in the White House. Now you've got the Democrats taking control of the House this week. So will their inevitable grandstanding regarding gun control and inevitable legislation, likely that will go nowhere because the Senate will never confirm it, will that affect the gun rights and gun control? Which will it affect positively, do you think? The gun rights movement or the gun control movement?
I don't know that the House control by Democrats itself will have much bearing. The only thing I can think of, Tim, is that it could drive, if they get traction, and they do have the entirety of the legacy media to help generate that traction. So I don't think it's far reach to say that they could get some traction. We could see some gun control proposals coming out of the House that some could get passed by the Senate. You know, the Donald Trump he has revealed with his bump stock ban to not be what many gun control opponents or gun rights advocates thought he was, which was a stalwart supporter of gun rights. Now, certainly, I don't think any of them would say that they would rather his major party opponent Hillary Clinton be president of the United States, because almost certainly she would be far worse on guns. But Trump is no picnic in terms of his fidelity to the gun rights movement.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfection in terms of a pro-gun rights president, and 0 being someone like Hillary Clinton, where would you put Trump?
5, middle of the road.
5 only?
Yeah, middle of the road. He has not used the power of his office to do things that could lift the burden on gun owners that they're currently placed with in terms of some of the background check waiting times and things like that he actually does have sole control over, appropriately sole control. What I mean by that is, we denigrate Barack Obama for saying he'll use his pen and his phone for doing things that we think that, are not the place of the executive. But who runs the ATF is the executive department, and the ATF could be either hostile to gun owners or responsive to gun owners, sort of more customer service focused. And we don't see that from Donald Trump. And in fact, the only thing we have in terms of new gun laws or regulations is an increased restriction, and in fact, one I believe that was handed down unconstitutionally and blatantly so in this bump stock ban that is going into effect presently.
All right. Issue 2 coming up in 2019, in your view?
Let's talk about drugs. Let's talk about marijuana. I tried to clip the sound, to find the sound to clip it for audio for you, and I couldn't find it anywhere out there. But I saw a commercial. I left CNN on for the dog the other day, and I tried to clip. There was a John Boehner commercial for some marijuana summit.
Yes, I know. That's too funny. It's too funny.
That he has gone all in on marijuana. Now he is, they're buttering his bread, so to speak. He's on the board of.
You mean he's getting paid for that? John Boehner as the face of marijuana legalization is just too funny to even process.
It's so
honestly,
right?
It really is.
So I just think we're going to see a lot of movement on that this year because there has to be movement on it. We now have Canada legalization, a 3,000-mile long undefended border where marijuana is legal, to say nothing of all the states in the United States.
It's now 10 where recreational use and sale are now permitted.
Non-prescription is the preferred term for those.
And when you include the states where it's legal to consume marijuana recreationally but not sell it, and the states that have prescription drug weed, that totals about 35, 36 at this point, I think.
Over a majority of states now. So there still needs to be a reckoning between the federal, and I always try to say this because I think so many people don't realize it. Any use, possession, growing, selling, anything regarding marijuana at the federal level is a federal felony, okay? That this happens every day in thousands and thousands, probably millions of transactions in America at every store that you've mentioned in those states. That cannot go on, and it needs to be rectified, and I think it will, just because what cannot go on will not go on.
Maybe the Democrats running the House will make a move on this, if only rhetorically.
It seemed like I didn't mean to cut you off there. It seemed like a no-brainer, though, right, for them to say.
Yeah.
But then again, Tim, the Democrats were the driving force in the drug war for so long. They controlled many states where they're the mayors of the big cities, where the drug war is the most punishing, where they have governors of those states that are Democrats that are controlled by Democrat legislatures. So the idea that they're somehow more enlightened on this issue, I think, is probably a false one.
Well, and Bill Clinton willingly picked up the drug war that had been started by his predecessor, George H.W. Bush. There was no...
Actually, if we want to look forward, Tim, Joe Biden is one of the principal authors of the crime bill that really did so much damage to the drug war. So the newest guy, who may very well be the next Democrat candidate for president of the United States, is one of the biggest drug warriors we have.
Mm-hmm. How ironic is that? Let's move to your number 3 choice for the most significant issue. And again, these are not in order preface necessarily, but
this probably should be number 1.
The third issue regarding individual liberty likely to be in play in 2019.
Well, this is free speech, and most often we talk about free speech issues when they concern direct involvement with government actors and non-government actors. And it's a little bit different because it involves these social media platforms, these online platforms, and how they are now playing the political game of defunding and disallowing people who say things they don't like. And usually the things that they, almost exclusively, who they deplatform is people on the right side of the political spectrum who are demanding free speech rather than censorious and left-wing speech. The most recent is Patreon. Patreon is basically, it used to be anyway, just a way for people to conveniently fund others. So we could have a Patreon account for this podcast, for instance, and people who wanted to support it could go and support the Patreon. Many podcasts were are and were supported this way. Well, they are now policing the language of the people who use Patreon for things they do off the network. So it would be like if a YouTube person had tweeted a couple of years ago a tweet and somebody said, oh, well, you can't be on YouTube now. And they said, well, why not? All my videos are clean and articulate and there's nothing there that's a problem. And they said, oh, yes, well, 3 years ago you sent this tweet out and it contains a word which we think is not an appropriate word to use in any circumstance. And you say, well, how can I? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense when people are using other people's words just simply for the sole purpose of shutting them up.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, with me and Scott and Lisa K. Donner, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this first week of 2019. We'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.